The final battle begins. Grand Admiral Thos scoffed as he looked out at the museum collection the humans called a fleet. Obsolete rust buckets from wars long past. But his scoff turned to shock as the human fleet opened fire, blasting his flagship apart. Thos gripped the armrests of his command chair aboard the Invincible, pride of the Fangi Galactic Empire. 500 sleek, deadly warships, the mightiest armada in the galaxy, filled the view screen. They had pursued the last remnant of humanity, refugees fleeing conquered Earth to this remote star system. Now only this pathetic collection of ancient ships stood between Thos and the final extermination of mankind. On the bridge of the 150-year-old UES Intrepid, Admiral Brian Adams watched the mass of enemy contacts appear on the sensor display. He took a deep breath, the stale, recycled air of the cramped CIC filling his lungs. Around him, officers and crew in sweat-stained uniforms manned their posts, grim-faced. "Admiral, the flux capacitor is leaking again," Engineers Mate Hernandez reported from the back of the bridge. "The duct tape patch won't hold for long. She's coming apart at the seams." Adams nodded, his eyes never leaving the tactical plot. The mighty Fangi fleet versus his cobbled-together force of hand-me-down frigates, freighters with pop guns welded on, and salvaged fighters. A few thousand brave human souls against a professional military of millions. Earth had fallen, humanity enslaved, and this was their last chance to strike back. He punched the fleet-wide comm. "This is Admiral Adams. You all know the odds. We're outnumbered 100 to 1. Our ships are old, our gear is failing. But this is it. Our last shot to give those Fangi bastards a black eye. No retreat, no surrender. All power to forward shields and weapons. Launch all fighters, pick your targets, and give 'em hell." Thos watched the view screen with a smirk as the human fleet approached. It was almost quaint seeing them put up one final struggle. The ships were relics, small frigates and destroyers that should have been scrapped decades ago. A handful of light cruisers, including what appeared to be an Intrepid class, formed the core of the formation. Thos hadn't seen one of those rust buckets in over 100 years. He signaled to his arms officer, "Open a channel to the humans." The officer nodded, and Thos straightened his uniform before speaking. "This is Grand Admiral Thos of the Fangi Galactic Empire. Your species' pathetic resistance is at an end. Surrender now and your lives will be spared, to an extent. Refuse, and you will be annihilated." On the Intrepid's cramped bridge, Adams listened to the message and shook his head. He had expected nothing less from the arrogant Fangi leader. "Put me on," he told Lieutenant Singh. Adams took a breath before responding, his voice steady. "Thos, you arrogant prick, we're done being your slaves. This is our chance to spit in your eye one last time. You want these ships? Come and get them." He made a cutting motion across his throat, and Singh closed the channel. The lieutenant looked at him expectantly. "Arm the Shiva warheads and prepare a full spread of torpedoes," Adams ordered. "Target their lead dreadnought." Singh grinned fiercely. "Aye, sir." As the distance closed, alarms started pinging on the Invincible's bridge. An officer studied his display with a frown. "Admiral, sensors are picking up strange energy readings from the human ships. Some kind of radiation I've never seen before." Thos waved a hand dismissively, not taking his eyes off the approaching fleet. "Ignore it. Probably just interference from those antique fusion cores they use. Prepare to fire." The human ships entered weapons range, and Thos leaned forward in his seat. "All ships, open fire. Wipe them out." The first volley. The Fangi fleet unleashed a storm of missiles and energy beams at the human ships. Explosions blossomed in the darkness of space. Plasma beams and railgun slugs streaked out from the Fangi ships, over 1,000 deadly lines of fire racing toward the human fleet. The decks of the old United Earth Navy ships rattled as their point defense grids flared to life. Automated turrets swiveled and spat crimson beams back at the incoming ordnance. Explosions burst in the void as the lasers intercepted the enemy fire with shocking precision. It wasn't enough. The sheer volume of Fangi weapons overwhelmed the human defenses. A destroyer to port of the Intrepid vanished in a blinding fireball, as a clutch of plasma beams speared through its hull. The frigate Hornet lost a drive pod to a slug impact and spun away, venting atmosphere. More human ships fell, consigned to oblivion by the implacable enemy guns. The Intrepid shuddered violently. Sparks exploded from an overloaded console. The lights flickered, and a support beam crashed to the deck. Adams gripped the arms of his chair as damage reports flooded the bridge display. Breaches in the forward torpedo bay. Casualty reports from the crew deck. A fire in the landing bay. He ignored it all, his gaze locked on the looming enemy dreadnought. Torpedoes locked and ready. Singh called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. Adams stabbed a finger at the view screen. Fire. The Intrepid's prow lit up as the forward tubes flushed. 20 torpedoes burst free on plumes of exhaust, racing away toward the Fangi flagship. The enemy point defenses scythed the void, filling space with crisscrossing laser beams. Torpedoes died under the defensive fire, detonating prematurely. A handful made it through the barrage. Proximity fuses triggered starbursts of nuclear fire, silhouetting the Fangi dreadnought. On the Invincible's bridge, the sensor officer bolted upright, his eyes wide. He whirled to face those, his face pale. Admiral, the energy readings. Those torpedoes had antimatter warheads. Those surged to his feet, disbelief etched on his angular features. Impossible. Antimatter weapons are banned. The humans don't have that capability. As if to refute his words, the human ships belched fire. Hundreds of torpedoes, far more than their magazines should have been able to hold, leaped from their tubes. Voss watched the incoming ordnance with growing horror. If each of those carried the destructive power he had just witnessed. Evasive action. He barked. All power to shields. Shoot them down. Shoot them all down. The Fangi ships scattered, desperate to escape the oncoming storm. The antimatter torpedoes streaked through the void, slamming into the Fangi fleet with the force of 1,000 suns. Shields flared and failed under the onslaught, unable to withstand the raw destructive power of annihilated matter. The first rank of Fangi capital ships simply ceased to exist, consumed by blinding flashes of light as the torpedoes detonated. Shockwaves ripped through the formation, shredding the closest vessels like tissue paper. Armor plates buckled and hulls ruptured, spilling atmosphere and debris into the void. In the span of seconds, 30 mighty Fangi warships were reduced to expanding clouds of incandescent plasma and twisted metal. Thousands of lives snuffed out in an instant. The battle cruisers broke apart, their spines snapped by the force of the blasts. Destroyers tumbled end over end, leaking air and bodies. Dreadnoughts fired their thrusters in desperate attempts to escape the maelstrom, only to be caught by secondary explosions as their antimatter reactors went critical. On the bridge of the Intrepid, the crew erupted in cheers as the sensor feeds showed the destruction they had wrought. Hardened veterans and green recruits alike shouted in triumph, hugging each other and pounding each other's backs. Even the normally stoic Admiral Adams allowed himself a fierce grin. He stood from his command chair, his fist punching the air. "How do you like that, you Fangi bastards? All ships, close to point-blank range, and engage at will. Today, we show them what humans are made of." As one, the Galactic human fleet surged forward, straining their old sublike drives to the limit. Maneuvering thrusters flared as the ships jockeyed for position, angling for optimum firing solutions. Fighters and assault shuttles launched from hangars, adding their guns to the fray. The Fangi ships recovered quickly, though, rallying around their wounded flagship. They turned to face the oncoming humans, their weapons already spitting fire. The two fleets interpenetrated, weaving through each other in a chaotic knife fight at ranges measured in kilometers rather than astronomical units. The turning point. The Intrepid shuddered as a railgun slug glanced off her pitted armor, leaving a jagged rent in the ablative plating. Point defense lasers stabbed out at incoming missiles, filling the void with crisscrossing beams of coherent light. A destroyer off the cruiser's starboard bow exploded as a plasma beam punched through its overloaded shields and into the reactor compartment. On the bridge of the Invincible, those snarled orders, his earlier amusement forgotten. His eyes locked on the weaving Intrepid, hatred burning in his gaze. All ships, focus fire on that damned Intrepid. I want that admiral's head on my wall. The Fangi flagship and a dozen other dreadnoughts swung their prows towards Adams's cruiser, abandoning their engagements with the human escorts. Weapons ports glowed star-bright as they unleashed a storm of fire at the lone vessel. Impossibly, the Intrepid jinked and slid through the firestorm, its helmsman guiding the ship through minute gaps in the verage. Armor melted and ran in glowing rivulets as near misses scorched the hull, but still, the cruiser twisted and rolled, lashing out with its own guns whenever a target presented itself. Thos clenched his fists as the Intrepid loosed another spread of torpedoes, blasting an escorting battleship to fragments. He opened his mouth to scream new orders, but the words died on his lips as a new contact suddenly appeared on the tactical plot. A Fangi battlecruiser, maneuvering to bring its broadside to bear on the humans, unwittingly crossing into the Invincible's line of fire. Time seemed to slow as Thos watched the disaster unfold. The mighty dreadnought's guns, locked on the human flagship, continued to cycle even as the battlecruiser blocked the Intrepid from view. Railgun slugs and plasma beams, meant for Adams's ship, instead slammed into the battlecruiser's shields, overwhelming them instantly. The Fangi vessel exploded in a brilliant flash, shattered by its own flagship's guns. The Intrepid shuddered as a plasma beam grazed its hull, leaving a molten scar along the cruiser's flank. Sparks erupted from overloaded consoles on the bridge, smoke filling the air. Adams coughed, waving a hand to clear his vision. The tactical display showed the Fangi flagship, the Invincible, carving a path through the melee towards them, its guns hammering the human ships mercilessly. "We can't take another hit like that," Hernandez yelled from the engineer station. "Shields are down to 20%. Adams gritted his teeth. They needed to take out Thos' dreadnought, or this battle was lost. He turned to Singh at the weapons console. "What's the status of our Shiva warheads?" Singh checked his display, brow furrowed. "We have 3 left, sir, but they're not antimatter. There's something else, some kind of exotic matter." Adams's eyes widened as realization dawned. He recalled a top-secret briefing from Dr. Hawking, the lead scientist of the UEA's Advanced Weapons Division. The man had promised a game-changer, a weapon that could turn the tide against the Fangi. That crazy bastard actually did it. Adams muttered. He made good on his word. He faced Singh, a plan forming in his mind. "Load the Shivas into our last 3 torpedo tubes and prepare to fire on my mark." He spun to Hernandez. "Divert all power to engines. We need to get close to the Invincible." Hernandez nodded, hands flying over her console. "Aye, sir. Engines to maximum." The Intrepid surged forward, plowing through the debris field of destroyed ships. Its hull groaned under the stress, the old cruiser pushing its limits. Railgun slugs and plasma beams slammed into the weakening shields as the Intrepid charged headlong at the Fangi flagship. On the Invincible's bridge, Thos watched the human cruisers approach with disdain. "Suicidal fools," he spat. "Blow them out of the stars." The dreadnought's guns swiveled to face the Intrepid, locking on with malicious intent. Adams saw the muzzles glowing hot as they prepared to fire. Knowing his ship couldn't survive a full barrage, warnings flashed urgently on the damage control console. Hull breaches across multiple decks, fires raging in the engine room, shield integrity falling fast. "Torpedoes ready," Singh reported, his face bathed in the crimson light of the flashing damage alerts. Adams clenched his fist. They were only going to get one shot at this. "Fire the Shivas," he roared. "Then get us the hell out of here." The Intrepid shuddered as the trio of torpedoes burst from its forward tubes, racing away on pillars of blue-white drive flame. Thos saw the incoming warheads and scoffed. More antimatter weapons. Our point defenses will handle them easily. He watched unconcerned as the torpedoes neared the Invincible, defensive lasers swiveling to acquire lock. But then, in the blink of an eye, the Shiva warheads accelerated to impossible speeds. They crossed the last kilometer to the dreadnought in microseconds, blurring into smears of light too fast for the tracking computers to follow. The Shivas slipped past the Invincible's shields as if they didn't exist and slammed into the dreadnought's hull. For a single, drawn-out heartbeat, nothing happened. Thos frowned. Confusion writ large on his angular features. Then the Invincible crumpled in on itself like an invisible fist had reached out and crushed the mighty warship into a singularity. Metal screamed and tore, bulkheads collapsing and compartments imploding. In less than a second, the pride of the Fangi fleet vanished, compressed into an infinitesimal point of absolute darkness. The chase. The bridge of the Intrepid fell silent. Jaws hung slack as the crew stared at the forward view screen, trying to process the impossible scene. Where the mighty Fangi dreadnought had loomed just moments before, only a pinprick of utter blackness remained. Hernandez found her voice first, a hoarse whisper that cut through the stunned atmosphere. Jesus Christ, what the hell were in those warheads? Adams blinked, shaking off the shock. They had to act fast, press the advantage while the enemy reeled. He punched the fleet-wide comms. All ships, the flagship is down. I repeat, the Invincible is destroyed. Concentrate fire on the nearest dreadnought, and don't let up. As if shaken from a spell by Adams's voice, the human fleet surged forward with renewed purpose. The battered ships swarmed the closest Fangi capital ships, guns blazing. The Fangi fleet, still reeling from the loss of their flagship and Grand Admiral, struggled to mount a cohesive defense. Their formation fractured as individual captains barked conflicting orders, trying desperately to regroup. On the bridge of a Fangi battleship, the captain pounded his fist on the armrest of his chair. All weapons, focus fire on that damned relic. It's just an old cruiser. It shouldn't be this hard to kill. His sensors officer interrupted, voice tight with fear. Sir, we're detecting more of those strange energy readings from the human ships. I think they're charging up more of those impossible weapons. The color drained from the captain's face as he watched the human fleet close in, the Intrepid at the spear tip. He jabbed a clawed finger at the helm station. All ships, fall back. Regroup at Rally Point, Delta. But it was too late. 3 more human torpedoes, the Shiva warheads, leaped from the Intrepid's forward tubes. They crossed the distance to the battleship in heartbeats, accelerating to physics-defying velocities. The Fangi point defenses, already taxed to the limit, couldn't even track the incoming warheads, let alone shoot them down. The Shivas slammed into the battleship's shields, bypassing them as if they didn't exist. For a single frozen instant, the massive Fangi vessel seemed to waver as if viewed through a heat haze. Then, like the Invincible before it, the battleship vanished, crushed into a pinprick singularity by the impossible power of the human weapons. The Fangi fleet limped through space, their formation fractured and scattered. Plasma fires burned uncontrolled across the hulls of once proud ships. Debris fields marked the graves of dozens of destroyed vessels. On the bridge of the battlecruiser Acquisitor, Captain Bragg gripped the armrests of his command chair, his knuckles pale. Status report, he barked. Shields are down to 12%. The tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. Deck 7 has lost atmosphere. We have hull breaches across multiple sections. Main reactor is offline. Bra snarled. To be defeated so thoroughly by the humans, mere primitive primates, was unthinkable. A lifetime of Fangi supremacy shattered in a single engagement by an enemy they had discounted. The comms officer suddenly straightened in his seat. Captain, priority message from Fangi Prime. It's the Emperor himself. Bra's stomach turned to ice. He forced his voice to remain steady. Put it through. The face of Emperor Zoran appeared on the view screen, his features etched with barely controlled rage. Captain Bra, I am ordering all ships to fall back to Fangi Prime immediately. Abandon the offensive. Your sole priority is now to defend the homeworld at all costs. Is that understood?" Bra hesitated, torn between his duty to obey and his burning desire to avenge this humiliation. To turn tail and flee before the humans, it was almost too much to bear, but the Emperor's gaze bored into him, promising swift retribution for any defiance. "Yes, Emperor," he said finally, the words bitter on his tongue. "It will be done." The screen went dark. Bray turned to his helmsman. "Set course for Fangi Prime, maximum speed, and broadcast the retreat order to all remaining ships. We're leaving." As the battered Fangi fleet turned and began to accelerate away from the battle, the human ships doggedly pursued. Antimatter torpedoes, the last dregs of their stocks, streaked from the human vessels to harass the fleeing Fangi. The Acquisitor shuddered as a near miss overloaded its weakened shields.